The tension in the air was thick, palpable. Maya Johnson stood near her son, James, who was sitting on a bench in the City Hall parking lot, his school bag resting beside him. Officers stood around them, their postures stiff, their eyes focused on James with suspicion. Maya had always taught James to stand tall, no matter the situation, but even now, under the watchful eyes of the officers, he couldn't help but shrink a little. His nerves were on edge, his heart beating faster. "Excuse me, officer. What's going on here?" Maya's voice was calm but firm. She stepped forward, her eyes locked on the lead officer. The officer hesitated before answering, his voice filled with discomfort. "Ma'am, we received a report about suspicious behavior. Your son was in an area that's usually restricted, and he wasn't able to identify himself." Maya's eyes narrowed, but she didn't flinch. "So you stopped him, surrounded him, and prepared to arrest him because he was sitting in a public space, waiting for his mother?" The officer shifted uncomfortably, looking at his colleagues for support. "Ma'am, it's protocol to respond to reports. We just wanted to make sure there was no issue." Maya's face softened, but her tone was unwavering. "You didn't see a child sitting in a public space. You saw a threat, and that, officer, is not something I can let slide." At that moment, James spoke up quietly, his voice steady but edged with anxiety. "I was just waiting for my mom. I wasn't doing anything wrong." The officer's gaze softened for a brief second, but he quickly regained his composure. He knew the situation had escalated beyond his control. As Maya continued to stand her ground, the crowd around them began to grow, drawn by the scene unfolding. Phones emerged, capturing every moment. A woman stepped forward from the crowd, her voice sharp. "Why is it always like this? Why do you stop him just because of how he looks?" Celeste, a local activist, demanded. "Is this how we treat all children, or just the ones that don't fit your idea of safe?" Maya took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She had seen this too many times, heard the same questions raised in countless other cities. But this time, it was personal. The tension was palpable, and the crowd grew. Phones were out, capturing every moment, and the officers seemed to feel the weight of the watching eyes. Maya remained calm but resolute, her eyes locked on the officer in front of her. "You see a kid standing in a public space, waiting for his mother, and you think he's a threat? Tell me, officer, is this really what we're becoming?" Maya's voice was sharp now, demanding an answer. The officer, visibly shaken, shifted on his feet. He glanced around at his colleagues, but no one spoke. The silence between them grew heavier, thick with the unspoken truths that neither side wanted to confront. "It's just protocol, ma'am," he said finally, his voice low. "We were just following standard procedure. It's nothing personal." Maya's eyes narrowed. "If it's nothing personal, then why does it feel like he's being treated differently just because of how he looks?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly now. Before the officer could respond, a voice cut through the tension. "She's right." A tall man, dressed in a suit, stepped forward from the crowd. He was someone Maya recognized, a local community leader. "This is about more than protocol. This is about how we perceive people. It's about the assumptions we make." Maya turned to face him, nodding in agreement. "Exactly. This isn't just about a single moment. This is about the culture that allows these assumptions to flourish." She paused, her voice growing more resolute. "It's a culture where children, particularly Black children, are seen as threats for simply existing." The crowd fell silent, the weight of her words sinking in. James sat still on the bench, his face flushed with both fear and frustration. He had been watching his mother, but now he couldn't look at the officers. His gaze was on the ground, his fingers tapping nervously on his school bag. Maya reached out, placing a gentle hand on James's shoulder. "You're safe, baby. They can't take that from you," she said softly. Then she turned back to the officer. "But this isn't something we can just brush off. This has to change." There was a long pause, the air thick with the unspoken acknowledgement of the truth. Finally, the officer nodded, a reluctant concession. "We'll report it to the department," he said quietly. As Maya gently guided James toward the car, she felt a sense of both relief and sorrow. Relief because for the first time in a long while, someone had seen her son for who he was, a child, no more, no less. Sorrow because she knew this was only the beginning. As they reached the car, James finally looked up. His voice was steady, but there was a trace of uncertainty in it. Mom, do you think things will ever change? Maya took a deep breath before answering. Change takes time, baby. But sometimes change starts with just one spark, and that's all we need to begin. As they drove away, James felt a small flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, things could be different. And that was enough. For now. The following day, the entire city seemed to be buzzing with the aftermath of the parking lot incident. News outlets ran the story repeatedly, with the grainy footage of James sitting on the bench now viewed by hundreds of thousands. People were talking, some in support, others questioning, but the conversation had begun. At City Hall, the mood was tense. Staff members whispered behind closed doors, and the atmosphere in the offices felt heavier than usual. Maya entered the building with a new sense of determination, her posture straighter, her eyes sharper. She wasn't just the mayor anymore. She was now a symbol of resistance. As Maya walked to her office, she passed a group of young people standing in the hallway. They nodded to her, some with hesitant smiles, others with solemn expressions. One young woman, a high school student, approached her cautiously. Mayor Thompson, I just wanted to say thank you, she said softly. You spoke for all of us yesterday. Maya smiled, a brief but genuine gesture. It's not just me, she said, her voice steady. It's all of us. We all have to speak up. Later that morning, Maya stood before a room full of city officials, her staff surrounding her. The meeting was supposed to be a regular briefing, but Maya had other plans. She wasn't there just to talk about policy. She was there to talk about change. We cannot keep turning a blind eye to the reality that so many of our citizens live in fear simply because of the color of their skin. Maya began, her voice carrying the weight of the moment. We can no longer afford to dismiss these concerns as isolated incidents. This is systemic, and it's time to address it. One of the senior police officers shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Mayor, with all due respect, we follow procedures to ensure public safety. It's not about race, he said, trying to justify his stance. Maya's gaze was unwavering. You follow procedures, but what happens when those procedures are built on bias? When you see a child as a threat based on nothing but your own assumptions? Her voice had a quiet force to it. The room fell silent. Maya didn't need to say anything more. The truth hung in the air, undeniable. A few days later, Maya was invited to appear on a local news show. The topic of discussion was, of course, the events of the parking lot and what the city was doing in response. As the cameras turned on, Maya sat down, her expression calm but resolute. What happened that day is a symptom of a larger problem, Maya said, her voice steady as she addressed the audience. We are living in a world where the mere presence of certain people is enough to provoke fear. That has to end. The show's host, clearly moved by her words, nodded in agreement. Do you think the city is ready for that kind of change? He asked. Maya paused, looking directly into the camera. It won't be easy, she replied, but it has to start somewhere. It starts with us. As the show ended, Maya felt a sense of purpose stronger than ever. The road ahead would be long, but she knew she was no longer alone in this fight. The following week, Maya stood at the podium once more, this time not in the confines of her office, but before a larger audience. The city council meeting was packed, filled with concerned citizens, city workers, and activists. The tension in the room was palpable. Today is not just about a single incident, Maya began, her voice calm but firm. It's about our future. It's about what kind of city we want to be. And I believe, in my heart, we are better than what we have seen. She paused, letting her words sink in. But for that to happen, we need to confront the truth. We need to be brave enough to face the uncomfortable realities that have been swept under the rug for far too long. A few members of the council exchanged uneasy glances, but Maya continued, undeterred. This city, like many others, has long ignored the voices of the marginalized, but today that stops. Today we make a commitment to every child, every parent, and every citizen in Redwood Heights. She took a breath before delivering her next statement, a promise to the city. Effective immediately, we are launching an initiative to bring more diverse voices into every level of our decision-making, and we will not stop until every person in this city, no matter their background, feels safe seen, and heard. A murmur of approval rippled through the crowd, but some skeptics in the back of the room still crossed their arms, unsure if these promises could be kept. Maya addressed them directly. I know there are those who doubt the possibility of change. I know because I've been in your shoes. But change isn't easy, and it's not immediate. It's built through action, and we are going to take action. The meeting went on for hours as officials and residents alike shared their thoughts. Some in support, some not so much. But the energy in the room was different. It was no longer just about the incident. It was about something bigger, something that could transform the city. As the session came to a close, Maya stood and nodded to the room, her expression resolute. This is just the beginning, she said, her voice steady. We have work to do, but together we can create the city we all deserve. As she walked out of the building, Maya felt a sense of hope rising within her. The battle was far from over, but it had begun. And sometimes that's all it takes, a spark to ignite change. In the weeks that followed, the city began to shift. It wasn't a dramatic, overnight transformation, but the signs were there. More people of color were speaking at city meetings. New community leaders emerged, ones who had always been there, but whose voices had been stifled for far too long. Maya, who had once feared the backlash of speaking out, now walked through the halls of City Hall with a renewed sense of purpose. Every day, more and more people approached her to share their stories. Stories of discrimination, fear, and most importantly, hope. One afternoon, as she sat at her desk reviewing proposals for new educational programs aimed at diversifying the city's schools, her phone buzzed. It was a message from her son, Jake. Hey, Mom, can we talk later? Maya smiled at the message. Things were starting to feel a little more normal, and that was a good sign. When they met later that evening, Jake had something on his mind. I've been thinking a lot about the rally last week, about everything that's happened since. Do you really think things are going to change? Maya looked at him, her face softening. Change isn't easy, Jake. But change is happening. You've seen it, haven't you? Jake nodded slowly, but there was still doubt in his eyes. I see people talking about it, but I don't know if they really mean it, or if it's just another thing that will fade away. I understand how you feel, Maya said softly. I've been there too. But we've started something important, Jake. And even if it feels like a slow progress, it's still progress. It's about being patient and persistent. And most importantly, it's about showing up every day, even when it's hard. The next morning, Maya woke up early to prepare for another city council meeting. She felt a sense of anticipation in the air as she dressed for the day. The work was far from over, but the weight of it no longer felt as heavy. It was as if she had learned how to carry it with more grace. As she arrived at the council chamber, she was greeted with the same mix of curiosity and skepticism. The room fell silent when she entered, everyone watching her, waiting for her next move. Maya was no longer intimidated. She was ready. Good morning, she began, her voice steady, unwavering. Today, we're not here just to talk about policies or programs. We're here to talk about people. We're here to talk about how we make sure that every citizen of this city feels valued and heard, that no one is treated as invisible. The room was still, the weight of her words sinking in. Maya glanced around the chamber, meeting the eyes of the council members one by one. This is not about doing the bare minimum. This is about doing what is right. And right now, the right thing is to stand up and be accountable. As Maya left the chamber that day, there was a sense of quiet determination in the air. She knew this battle would be long, but it was one worth fighting. Redwood Heights was beginning to change, and she was going to make sure that change was real. The following weeks brought a wave of new conversations to City Hall. What had begun as a moment of crisis was turning into a movement. People from all walks of life began gathering, some to voice their frustration, others to share their stories of fear, and many more to express hope for a better future. At the heart of it all was Maya, whose name had become synonymous with change. She wasn't just the mayor anymore. She was a symbol, a beacon for those who had long felt invisible, silenced by a system that had perpetuated fear and division. One day, Maya found herself standing in front of a new coalition of community leaders, a mix of educators, activists, business owners, and even former law enforcement officers who had all come together to make a difference. They were ready to begin the difficult work of rethinking public safety. It's not enough to just say we want change, Maya said, her voice filled with resolve. We need to put in the work. We need to listen. We need to understand. A man named Richard, an ex-police officer, spoke up next. I've spent years enforcing laws that I now realize were never about protecting everyone equally. We've got to rethink how we respond to situations like the one Maya's son faced. It's not about enforcing the law for the sake of authority. It's about respecting people's humanity. Maya nodded, appreciating the shift in perspective. Exactly. This isn't just about policy. It's about a fundamental change in how we see each other, how we treat each other, and that starts right here in this room with all of you. The group worked tirelessly over the next few months, drafting new proposals that would reshape how the city approached policing, education, and public spaces. They called it the Humanity First Initiative, a bold attempt to realign the city's values with its actions. The initiative gained traction, and soon the media was covering it extensively. People began to talk less about the incident and more about the future, the tangible, concrete steps being taken to ensure the city was safer for everyone. But even as momentum built, Maya knew that the real challenge was still ahead. It wasn't enough to pass policies and initiatives. The true measure of success would be in the hearts and minds of the people of Redwood Heights. One evening, as Maya walked home from a meeting, she passed the same bench where Paul had sat that fateful day. It looked just as ordinary as before, yet Maya saw it with new eyes. This was the same space, but it had been transformed. It was no longer a symbol of fear, but of resilience and change. She stopped, taking a deep breath, and smiled. For the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of peace. The work was far from over, but they were heading in the right direction. As she continued her walk home, she thought of Paul, sitting on a different bench now, a different kind of quiet confidence in his gaze. Things were changing, and it was just the beginning. The weeks passed, and as the Humanity First initiative gained support, the city's tone began to change. People were no longer just talking about fear, they were talking about solutions. At the heart of these discussions was the real question. What does it mean to truly respect another person's humanity? A local high school held its first town hall meeting on the topic, and Maya was invited to speak. The auditorium was packed with students, teachers, and parents, many of whom had witnessed the video of the incident. As Maya took the stage, she could feel the weight of the moment. She was no longer just a politician. She was a mother, a leader, a symbol of change. What happened to my son could have happened to any of you, Maya began, her voice steady but filled with emotion. And it didn't happen because of something he did. It happened because of how he was seen. But we can change that. We must. The room was quiet, each person hanging on her every word. For the first time, they weren't just hearing about policy change. They were hearing the truth about how fear, assumption, and bias shape our lives. Maya continued, her gaze sweeping across the crowd. This initiative isn't just about what happens in the streets or in the courtroom. It's about how we treat each other every single day. It's about how we see each other when we walk into a room, when we interact with someone who's different from us. That's where real change begins. At the back of the room, one student raised her hand. But how do we make sure it's not just talk? She asked. How do we know people are actually going to change? Maya smiled, a small but hopeful smile. That's the hard part, she admitted. Change isn't easy, and it doesn't happen overnight. But it starts with honest conversations. It starts with people like you asking the tough questions, and it starts with actions, not just words. After the meeting, students gathered in small groups to discuss what had been said. Maya watched from a distance, a quiet sense of pride welling up inside her. This was what progress looked like. Later that week, Maya sat with her team, reviewing the feedback from the town hall. The overwhelming response had been positive. People were ready for change, and they wanted to be a part of it. But there were still challenges ahead. We need to keep the momentum going, her communications director said. We've got support, but we can't stop here. We need to make sure this movement isn't just a moment. It needs to be a movement that lasts. Maya nodded, her mind racing with ideas. This wasn't just about her son or her city anymore. This was about a generation of young people who would grow up believing in a world where respect for all people was the standard, not the exception. As the meeting ended, Maya looked out the window. The sun was setting, casting a soft glow over the city. She felt the weight of her responsibilities, but she also felt something else. Hope. She could see a better future ahead, and she was ready to fight for it.